Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the podcast known as Riding the Pine. I'm your boy, Martin Irving. My co pilot with me, Mr. Drake White.
Peace, boys.
And, it's the end of the summer, and some guys are without contracts. And we're going to talk about those specific guys without contracts. And, we might guess, maybe some correctly,
Yeah, no, it'd be
as
kind of funny if we
to
actually
who's
just hit
going
on a
where.
couple of those, right?
You never know, right?
Yeah, let's just
Um,
go with a really crazy, outrageous take. See, maybe that guy actually goes there, and then we look like absolute geniuses.
yeah, not as good as the guy who started the rumor that Matthews was going to Arizona, but
That rumor's been
maybe
going
something.
around for years. Come on, he's never going to Arizona, man. Maybe at the end of his career, but he's never going to Arizona until he has a cup. Not happening.
Arizona's leaving before Matthews does, so.
Oh, okay. Now I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but no, he's not going to Arizona anytime soon. He was never going to leave, the blue and white. He loves the spotlight. He's not going anywhere. That's not what we're talking about today. That would have been one for next year had he not signed.
On the list, a guy that it'd be pretty crazy 5 years ago. We were talking about if we were talking about him not having a contract second last week of August. Cab drivers beware. Mr. Patty Kane, where is he ended up?
Oh my God. I mean, Patrick Kane, it seems like, I don't know, him in a contract is like the biggest will they, won't they. But at the same time this year, nobody's talking about it. Like it's complete dead silence where this guy is going to go. There's been a couple rumors here and there, but I mean, right, there's been nothing productive from the looks of it, right? Like it's just been quiet. Last year, might have been a bit of a down year for him. He only had 57 points in 73 games. But I mean, you need to factor in the fact that, it was a very weak Chicago team. He was just coming off an injury, I'm pretty sure. I mean, New York, he never really quite got it going that the way that they were hoping for. And I mean, part of that might just be that, when you got a team like New York last year, it was really just a top group of 12. And most of them are the exact same player type. Most of them just didn't defend. I didn't think Patrick Kane was really the move, especially after getting Vladimir Tarasenko. And I'm not overly surprised that, we ended up walking in free agency. They didn't have room. It was a one-time thing. Right now, obviously, he's going to be out for probably about another 4 months due to a hip injury. So, I mean, that really puts a lot of pressure on a couple teams out there, too, right? I mean, not everybody's going to sign the guy and want to wait for 4 months. But at the same time, they might not want to wait for those 4 months to be up and then he's signed elsewhere, right? So, I mean, like, there's maybe, I'd say everybody's kind of kicked some tires on Patrick Kane, but I mean, let's be real. There's only so many teams that he would really end up going to, and I think it's either going to be a team where he can get exposure that can move him at the deadline if they're not good, or a team that's already competing that has a little bit of cap space to throw around with him. Somewhere that he can go win a cup. So, I mean, like, I don't know. When I think teams, that might be able to flip him, but definitely have room. Boston. Yeah, everybody's just kind of left Boston. They don't really have much cap space right now. They only got about 429,000. But I mean, right now they have a surplus of defensemen. They might not be great defensemen. I mean, you got Derek Forbort making $3 million. He's got 1 year left. I'm sure, there might be a team or so that might go looking for him if the team's struggling a bit. And, he has a bit of a rough camp. So I mean Patrick Kane could certainly be a fit in there. Put him on the power play with Marchand and Pasternak. I'm not sure what you think, but I think that might be a decent fit, maybe. Might be a little bit cursed.
Yeah, it's hard to say with Boston. Their identity is kind of questionable right now. They're not really leaning towards a full rebuild, but they're not also, leaning towards a playoff team as of right now. So, like a guy like a guy like Kane could really shake that up, but I don't know. At the same time, that team wouldn't be getting any younger if they did sign him. So,
Yeah, what I think, with Bosch, and it's one of those situations though where they're not quite ready to rebuild yet. Because if they were ready to rebuild, Marchand would have been gone already,
oh
right?
yeah,
They would have Allmark would have been gone, but they haven't done that. So I think they still think they got something left in the tank. So I mean, you add Patrick Kane to that equation, you're gonna be better regardless. I mean, there's a second team in the league too with, that they wear the black and gold that I could see potentially going in for him. Pittsburgh's really going for it this year. They went out, they got Eric Carlson. They bolstered the depth. And then Jake Gensel gets hurt. So that frees up almost $6 million.
That's another team
So
that never
what
seems
better
to
way to
be
fill your $6 million
rebuilding.
than Patrick Kane? Imagine Patrick Kane, Evgeny Malkin, Chris Letang, Eric Carlson, and Sidney Crosby, all on one team. You're winning every single Stanley Cup in the 2010s.
Well, we'll see if Dubas can come up with some random cap. He always seems to find a way to find more cap space. So if he did, he'd have to pull some magic here. But I
Yeah,
don't
well,
know.
that's the thing with Pittsburgh, right? Is they're always going to push it. Dubas always finds the cap space, but like I said, like they got $6 million to work. But Gensel's out for a little while. He's going to be on LTIR. So I mean, you got a little bit to work with. It just depends on what his timeline ends up being. Coming into camp. When they think they're going to come back. Because if they can push it and they can get Patrick Kane for cheap, right? Like that's a very deep forward group with a lot of firepower. And I could very much see them trying to make a move with a big name player as they go for one big last hurrah to win another Stanley Cup before inevitably all their stars get to the point where they need to retire, right? And I
Drake,
mean,
we get
what?
we sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
Well, what were you
Oh,
going to say?
I was gonna say there's another guy on our radar that wore both of those jerseys. He's a bit of a glizzy gladiator,
Ooh, Phil Kessel.
Mr. Phil Kessel.
Yeah, this one should be interesting. I can't believe you cut me off before I finished with Kane, but yeah, no, like Phil Kessel,
I
you know, he's
gotta keep
35 years old.
the
He put
time
up
limit in.
36 points. You
Yeah,
know, it it's not a bad season. He's not known for being, stellar defensively. He's definitely taken a step back. He clinched the Ironman streak this year. And I mean, he didn't make a whole lot. He only made about 1.5 million last year. So I mean, he's going to be cheap once again this year. I mean, there's tons of team that could be interested in too, right? Like Boston again. If they can make a little bit of room. Vegas has about 850,000 left over. So if he really wants to go cheap, he can always go back to Vegas. Chicago's got 12 million right now. I'm sure he'd want to go play with Connor Bedard. Florida, depending on how Sam Reinhart goes, they're going to have a decent chunk of money to work with. And I mean, you got Toronto too. I mean, I'm sure. I mean, he loved Toronto. I'm sure if Toronto could find a little bit of room, I mean, right now they're in the negative. They'd have to make a move. But if the opportunity presented itself, I can't see Phil Kessel, 100% denying to go to Toronto, right? I'm pretty sure he still has a home there. He brought the Stanley Cup back to Toronto. Like it just makes sense to bring him back.
hear me out. The Jays have a special event every couple of weeks that's right up his alley that would bring him in instantly.
We
I'm talking
talk
about Looney Dog Night.
over here.
No, he's coming back for Looney Dog Night.
Ooh,
You know,
that'd be
like
the first guy I'd want to have sponsored for Looney Dog Night.
Vegas, they don't even have loonies. Boston, they don't even have loonies. How can you have Looney Dog Nights there? Toronto's the only place that has Looney Dog Nights. Phil Kessel, he's the hot dog man. So you know what? I think that alone can persuade him to come in.
I don't know. You know what else might be able to persuade him? A sponsorship from Schneider's.
That too.
Give them everything hot dog related. Like, just here, have lifetime supply of hot dogs as long as you come back to Toronto.
Yeah, it's kind of like a hamburglar sitch. Like
Yeah, instead
I
instead of throwing hamburgers to him, everybody throws hot dogs to him every time he scores.
yeah, we can make this work. It's a little better than rats.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that we might need to get hired on with the Leafs for this. I mean, it's just perfect.
Yeah, I mean this is only our first episode, but I think we need to move up right away and get in the promotional department for the Leafs because we're definitely onto something here.
Yeah, I think so. I think, go find, Brendan Shanahan's number and tell him we want a job. As long as he gets us Phil Kessel.
Now, if I was a seafood company, I'd probably try to get this guy to be a sponsor. His name kind of sounds like a condiment you use with salmon. Thomas Tatar.
Thomas. Ta-ta! Never gets old. Well, I mean, Tatar's another interesting situation. I'm honestly surprised he hasn't signed anywhere yet. Because I mean, he had 48 points last year, 20 goals. So I mean, even at 32 years old, he's a 20-goal guy.
Oh
He
yeah,
can still give you close to 50 points. He's fairly cheap at about $4.5 million last year. But it's weird because you don't hear too much about Tatar this year. He just again he's like Kane. He's just radio silence. I mean, like with Kane, there's rumors of Dallas, Colorado, Buffalo, my personal pick, New Jersey, Boston. With Tatar, you're really only hearing Pittsburgh, right?
I
And
feel like Pittsburgh has been linked to everybody this year.
I think so. I think Pittsburgh is honestly the new Toronto
It's just
Maple
the
Leafs. They
Dubas
just,
effect.
maybe it's just a Kyle Dubas thing that he's constantly in on practically everybody. I mean, Tatar, I'm pretty sure he might have been a guy that, Kyle Dubas wanted in Toronto. Would it make sense that, if they don't get Patrick Kane, Gensel's still out. I mean, you can probably get Thomas Tatar for cheap to bolster your top six group. He doesn't have a cup right now, so I mean, that would make sense. Another possibility, depending on the Pajot situation, because there's talk out there that the Islanders might be looking to move on from JG Pajot. I mean, the Islanders could potentially be an option. Older player seems to fit the mold of a New York Islander. They just always seem to get older. And just a personal hot take of mine. I mean, nobody thinks about it. Nobody's really been talking about this team other than the negatives. That's Calgary, right? You got Lindholm, who doesn't want to be there. Hannafin, who doesn't want to be there. Backlund, who doesn't want to be there. And think about all that money that you'd be freeing up if you move them. They're not going to rebuild because they have big contracts. They got Uyghur, they got Kadri, they got Huberto. They're not going to rebuild. But what better than add, Tatar to your top six group if you're trying to retool? He might not be as good as, a Lindholm, and he might not be as good defensively as a Backlund, but he's going to put up decent points for you. Stick him up with Huberto and see how he does, right? You might surprise yourself when he gets a little bit more freedom.
Yeah, I think Tatar would be a great compliment for anybody's, top six, but especially a team like that that's really struggling to
Yeah,
find
just
their footing in the league.
you had a toxic locker room last year with Daryl Sutter, right? So, I mean, the team wants to find a way to turn around. Unfortunately, nobody wants to be there anymore. So maybe it's time to change the culture, right? Bring in a guy, he's been around for a long time. He's done his fair share of at least regular season winning. He's won a lot in the playoffs. So, change up the culture a little bit. See if you can shake things up. And I mean, if he signs there, it shows that people still aren't fully against signing in Calgary. And I think that it might just be a decent move. I can see him in a Flames sweater already. It's just a matter of whether, the Flames are willing to do something like that.
Makes sense. He's been in the Canadian markets before. I think he
Totally.
could do it again.
Like another Montreal. I mean, Toffoli did Calgary and Montreal. Maybe you can ask Toffoli for, Toffoli just went to New Jersey. Tatar was
Yeah.
just in New Jersey. So, maybe they both just kind of do the circuit, right? They do a loop.
Yeah, this could be a trivia question 5 years down the road.
Yeah.
Which
Who
two
played for
players
what
played
team?
in Montreal, Calgary, New Jersey?
Yeah, we could do an entire Puckdoku just of Toffoli and Tatar, apparently.
Now I got
All right.
another player on our radar here.
All right.
Uh,
Shoot,
we
spill.
mentioned it's second last week of August. How about one more pool party? Mr. Jesse Puljujärvi. Does he
Oh,
stay
oh,
in the
oh,
NHL or does he go
oh,
back home?
oh, God. Puljujärvi is just an absolute mess to figure out where he's going. The Bison King himself. Whew. For years, this guy was supposed to be that guy, or maybe not that guy in Edmonton, but he was supposed to be good. I mean, you're playing with Connor McDavid. You gotta, you're gonna put up points. He made Zach Cassian a 40-point guy. But I mean, at the same point, to play with McDavid, you need to be able to keep up with McDavid, which unfortunately Puyarvi couldn't. So I mean, Edmonton unfortunately decided, he was having a bit of a year last year. He wasn't putting up the numbers that he had the year before, so they moved him. Well, unfortunately, it did not get better with Carolina, where he only put up a whopping 2 points. 2 points in 17 games, no goals. What the are you doing? You are playing with Svechnikov, Teravainen, Aho, right? Like you had those guys on your team. How are you only producing 2 points? He was playing on the absolute worst line in the playoffs. I think it was like him, Stepan, and Stastny. Like, that was an absolute brutal line. I mean, I'm honestly amazed that his line mate Stastny hasn't been signed anywhere yet, given the fact that he's actually still good. But Puljujärvi is a weird situation. He was making $3 million last year, and again, it's really quiet where he could go. I know I've seen a little bit about the Capitals. I unfortunately don't think that the Capitals are actually going to make a move on him anymore. I just don't see where it fits. I mean, I don't necessarily want to see him go back to Finland yet. He might, but I ultimately think that he's going to be one of those guys that, he's either going to go to a really crappy team, a Chicago or an Anaheim, right? That have tons of money that can pay him a little bit, helps them get to the cap floor a little bit easier. And, just a, low risk, high reward. He's still only 25. There's potential that he could bounce back easily and maybe even break out, put him up with Connor Bedard, see how it works. Because, I mean, the difference with Connor Bedard compared to Connor McDavid is it's stunning, right? McDavid, you got to be able to play with him. Bedard's going to make you good. You can pass him the puck, he's going to score. Or he'll pass you the puck. It doesn't matter. You can make it work. So, I mean, I think Chicago and Anaheim for sure would be options, if he ends up being really good and he wants money. You can always trade him too if, he starts raising the value. But on top of it too, I could also see, again, I could see Pittsburgh just bringing him in on a tryout, bring him in on a professional tryout, see how he does. Maybe he works with Crosby in some weird way, or even Tampa Bay, right? Bolster the bottom six a little bit. I could see Puljujärvi in blue and white. They're a
I was
team that,
kind of
they
thinking
do a lot, they need smaller contracts. So, I mean, you get the guy on a PTO and you see if he can run with it a little bit. And if not, there's no commitment. You let him go and that's that.
I mean, it's a low risk for any team, pretty much. I was thinking it was going to go to a blue and white team too, but kind of the opposite.
Oh, it's not going to be Toronto, bud.
I wasn't thinking Toronto. I was thinking Columbus.
I see Columbus is weird because he doesn't really fit in Columbus's scheme because they already got their top six in. They got their
Yeah,
top six guys. They got Adam Fantilli. They got Kent Johnson. They got Cole Sillinger, right? Boone Jenner's kicking around. Line, Gaudreau. They don't really need a Jesse Puljujärvi because at that point, Jesse Puljujärvi, he'd be on their third line, but their third line's probably like Boone Jenner, Jack Roslovic, you know, Voronkov, Chinakov's in the mix. So, I mean, he's kind of in a weird situation where he's not really a fit for them. So, I mean, I can't necessarily see Puljujärvi, but there is another guy that I potentially could see fit with Columbus, and that'd be Zach Parise,
yeah. As long as
right?
they don't sign him
39
to
years
a
old, playing in the bottom six on New York. You want to guess how many points this guy had? 82 games this year. He was
I didn't
making he was
didn't
making
hear a lot about him.
70,000. How much do you think
Um,
he's making at league minimum? What do
I,
you think he put up? Just roughly in the ballpark.
I imagine 20 points.
He put up 21 goals and
Oh wow.
34 points in the Islanders' bottom six as a 38-year-old, and nobody signed him.
Yeah, that's seems like both
Hasn't
once
retired.
him and Suter left Minnesota, they both kind of had a resurgence.
And
Like
maybe not quite Suter, but definitely Parise. Like, I mean, Parise's always been good, right? It's never like he
oh
was
yeah,
bad. He had a bad contract. But I mean, he works well as a bottom sixer now. He's not that guy that he was with the Devils, and he's not that guy that he was when he got traded to Minnesota. But I mean,
yeah,
he's still at 39 years old a good hockey player. So I
oh
mean,
yeah.
I think Columbus could be an option. They got about $4.5 million floating around right now. I could see him sliding into the bottom six over someone like, the Leafs killer Foodie. Robinson, Bemstrom, maybe they move on from Roslovic. I mean, there's definitely some opportunities. He'd be able to go in there and guide their young guys. He's a guy who's gone in the playoffs. Might not have gone as deep as you would have liked, but he brings leadership. He was a leader in Minnesota. He was the captain in New Jersey, right? So I mean, I could definitely see there being a fit here. Another team. They've been trading a lot off right now. Florida. They're in the negatives right now. But I mean, they got two guys on LTIR. It's a big question whether Ekblad's actually going to be back and when he's going to be back. Montour should be back for the start of the season. But regardless, they need wingers in that system now because they're kind of bare. I mean, you also got the potential that Reinhardt's traded, so I think Parise would be a nice fit for the bottom six. And I'm not totally, unwilling to write off a return to Nashville or Minnesota either. Minnesota bottom out, but Minnesota has a little bit of room and they could use some scoring help because there was a stretch last year where I think there was like a stretch of 7 games where not a single person scored unless Kaprizov was on the ice. This guy just put up 20 goals in the bottom six. I don't know. You'd be kind of stupid if he'd be willing to come back. Maybe that ship has sailed, but I mean, at least, field him an offer. It can't hurt, right? I mean, he might fall off, but it'd be for cheap. And if he booms, I mean, that's 30 points right there in your bottom six. That's a quality bottom sixer, right? So, I mean, personally, I'm amazed Parise's not around, right? I'm surprised nobody's talking about him. He hasn't retired, so I mean, he's definitely floating around out there. So I'm really curious what he's up to.
Yeah, he'd be a great veteran presence for a team that needs it.
Oh my!
Even, Chicago could be a decent fit for him too.
Well, I mean, in
But
Chicago has enough money; they would just throw him $4 million like they did with Perry and
yeah.
Foligno. Like here, we're gonna go win the 2016 Stanley Cup, right? So I mean, like I could see it. I mean, again, Chicago, they're pretty weak on the wings, right? Like their best winger is Taylor Hall, and after that is Athanasiou. That kind of hurts, but I mean, they can use that veteran presence to help guide along their youngsters, right? Lucas Reichel's going to be, full time. Connor Bedard is definitely going to be full time. So, I mean, bring in, a former captain, right, to go alongside your other former captains, kind of help guide, maybe even help prepare Seth Jones a little bit more for, a potential captaincy. Because, I mean, personally, I think it's going to be Seth Jones, right? He's the most ready right now. It's not fair to put those beliefs on Connor Bedard. So why not bring in like a Zach Parise to kind of help him out a little bit, right? Send him back to, gets him a bit closer to home. He's from Minnesota, right? So, I mean, it's not quite Minnesota, but it is in the same division, right?
Yeah, that's it seems like a real possibility. Get Bedard. These guys who have seen the league more than a lot of other guys. So
Yeah, well, I mean, you get them, right? Like between him, Perry, and, Parise, Foligno be like, back in my day, we went out there and it was legal to cross-check people without getting a penalty. Nowadays, you'll get your head taken off, young whippersnappers. Well, that's just Chicago. So you may as well
it
just
must
add another old man to it.
must feel weird for Foligno to be on the same team as Perry.
Oh my God. Yeah, that would be that will be interesting. I'm sure they're already best friends.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
And
so speaking of getting mauled, there's a guy with a name that sounds like he could maul you. I'm sure he's a lot friendlier than that, but Ethan Bear, kind of a interesting, still pretty young guy in the league
interesting
that really
story.
hasn't established himself yet.
Oh my God, yeah, Ethan Bear. I mean, it's funny you mentioned mauling, given the fact that he mauled Kachuk that one game. We all remember the game, Battle of Alberta. It's what like him, Talbot and Smith fight and Bear and Kachuk fight. And I'm pretty sure that was the game where Kachuk turtled against Cassian. So I mean, yeah, there's a little bit of bite to his game. Unfortunately, his season was derailed last year. He's never quite broken out. He's never become the player that he was in Bakersfield or what he was in junior. He was a smooth skating, more offensively minded back in the day. Last year he only had about 16 points in 61 games playing with Vancouver. And he played with Team Canada, and then he didn't put up any points in 8 games with Team Canada, and then his season was just kind of gone, right? Injuries just kind of hurt him. He's out for the next like 6 months, right? He's not coming back till like December or January. So it's really hard to figure out where Ethan Bear could even go. But personally, I think it's going to be a weak team. Someone that, they can give him, something cheap. And if he ends up being good, you flip him. So again, Chicago, right? Chicago is really weak in the defensive end, right? You got like Zaitsev, who's absolutely atrocious. Yeah, it's Seth Jones. So,
Chicago legend.
Seth Jones is all right. Not a great contract, but, Seth Jones is all right. Like Alex Vlasic, you know, Wyatt Kaiser, and the list goes on and on of all and Connor Murphy, right? But the list goes on that it's just a lot of very weekend, bottom pair of D-men. But if you go out, Ethan Bear, he can be a decent bottom four. He can be a number four for you. Unfortunately, like they got a whole bunch of right shot defensemen, but he might be a guy that could benefit from playing left side too. Sign him to like a league minimum, prove it deal, show me what you can do. If they like his game, maybe they keep him around. If not, flip him at the deadline. Same deal for Anaheim, right? There's a little bit that those two teams can work with. And then personally, I think, Tampa Bay is also weak defensively. They don't quite have the money, but if they can find a way to bring it in, he's not bad depth to have.
Yeah, Tampa, they're still gonna be a fringe playoff team. So it's
Of course, and
you want to get the best you
they're
can back there.
well, of course. They're in a situation now. You only really got three defensemen, and one of them's fallen off, right? You got Sergachev, you got Chernak, and you got Hedman. You hope that Hedman's going to bounce back, but who else is there? Hayden Fleury, Calvin DeHaan, Zach Bogosian, Nick Perbix. That's rough. So Ethan Bear, stick Ethan Bear out there with like Victor Hedman or Mikhail Sergachev, see what he can do, right?
Oh yeah,
Maybe he'd be decent.
get
Maybe
the
find
kid
what
some
has
confidence.
an uncanny way for making guys break in.
Yeah, get the kid some confidence.
Well, totally. And I don't know. There's another guy I think Tampa too, winding down to this this episode, I think Yaroslav Halak, he's still floating around. And
Yeah.
he might not have had the nicest numbers last year. He was only a 903. He 272 goals against in 25 games. He was 10-9-5. But it seemed like over the course of the year he started getting better, right? Like he's still a capable backup.
Oh
So
yeah.
I'm kind of thinking, he's coming off, he's 38 years old. He has, his last contract was $1.5 million. Ultimately, I think he's a PTO guy because he
Yeah.
wants to be a backup. He is not going to take anything less. He doesn't want to be a third stringer. He wants to be the backup, right? So he's not going to go somewhere. Most teams already have their goalies. Tampa Bay, their current backup is Jonas Johansson. Rough. New Jersey, they still have a very unproven goalie in Akira Schmid as their backup. So, you might be able to slide Halak in there. Vancouver's rolling Spencer Martin, who was absolutely atrocious at times last year. And you got Edmonton. And I just want to put Edmonton out there. I don't think it's going to happen. It's a little bit loony. But you had Skinner, who fell apart in the playoffs, and you had Campbell, who wasn't good all season. So, what are the odds that, Halak comes in and says, you know what, I'm going to outdo these guys? Because right now, their asses are over the fire, right? Skinner, he's not 100% safe. He starts going faulty. Well, here's Halak, right? Maybe they run three goalies, right? Like, he's going to go to a situation where he can set him up, set himself up as, you know, a proper backup for a team and as a veteran presence for their younger guys. At the end of the day, I think, most teams might be checking in on him. I could have seen it being, Toronto had they not gotten Martin Jones, right? It could have been Pittsburgh, right? If they didn't get Nedeljkovic. it could have been anybody, right? So I mean, I don't really want to write off Halak in the league yet because I still think he's got a couple of years in him. It's just a matter of when and where, and whether it's going to be a tryout or whether it's just going to be a full contract straight up.
Yeah,
But just
I
remember, there was once a point where this guy almost kicked Carey Price out of Montreal. So just remember that, yeah? Carey Price had to compete with this guy for starting. Just remember that.
I could see LA maybe making a push for him. LA's crease right now, ever since the departure of Jonathan Quick, has been a little
Yeah, well, you got
shaky.
Jonas
So
Corposalo. I mean, not Jonas Corposalo. He's gone. I mean, it's Cam Talbot, and then their backup is, I think, Phoenix Copley
yeah,
still.
and
So, I mean, yeah, I can see it. Because it's
yeah,
not like Copley was great last year either. I mean, Copley, he was all right. He was like Martin Jones. He had awful numbers, but he won a lot of games. Right? Team just played well in front of him. So, I mean, yeah, I could see Los Angeles.
and Talbot, he's not a bona fide starter anymore, unless he has a year like he did in Edmonton in 2017. That spot seems a little open,
Yeah.
possibly,
Well, I
perhaps.
could also see Philadelphia too. Where you got Carter
Philly
Hart's a
too, yeah.
good starter, but they don't really have a true backup. They got Urson, right?
And will
Who's
Hart make it
probably
to the
their
deadline?
backup. Hmm?
And will Hart make it to the deadline? That's another question.
Hart probably makes it to the deadline. It depends on how Philadelphia's doing, but he's their guy.
Yeah.
Ultimately, though, like most of these guys, they could go practically anywhere. I'll circle it right back, to the start too, right? With Patrick Kane too, just to kind of close out. But I mean, I still think he's the most interesting free agent right now because there's just so many avenues he could go. He
Oh,
could go to
easily.
Colorado. He could go to Colorado or Dallas. Dallas might have to move on from Hakampa. Colorado's still an option. Landeskog's on LTIR, right? Go there, win a cup. Tampa Bay, if they made room. Pittsburgh, New Jersey. I mean, they missed out on Gaudreau. Imagine Kane and Hughes. Toronto, depending on what happens with Nylander, even though Nylander's probably not leaving now. Buffalo, he's from Buffalo. They got $8 million, right? He could go anywhere. And like I said, like that's the same for all these guys. And now watch, we're going to be completely wrong. They're not going to go anywhere we want. Half of these guys are going to retire. Patrick Kane's going to have a major setback. He's going to miss the entire season. Ethan Bear's going to call it quits or something. Phil Kessel is actually going to hang it up because nobody wants to sign the Glizzy Gobbler, right? And Halak has to overseas, right? That'll be our luck. That we come
well,
up with all this and they all end up having to go to Europe or something.
well, we got our predictions down now in stone.
Yeah,
We'll
well,
uh
yeah, I
we'll
guess
do a
it is.
return to this
Come at
soon.
us. If you think we're idiots, come at us now.
Well, how about we book it 6 months from now? We take a return to this video and see how wrong we were.
Yeah, you know what? Well, I'll see. 6 months when most of these guys will probably be signed. We'll come back in 6 months. We're going to be talking. What our predictions for the season to begin with. Some hot takes and that coming up anyway. So I mean, why not? Let's see what we can come up with, right? Let's see how wrong we can possibly be. Because for a fact that we're just not going to get any of this right now. Now that
And
we put it in.
you know, we're gonna be riding the predictions on riding the pine.
Or you betcha.
Oh yeah. Well, I think that's it for today. But we'll be back next episode. We're gonna be talking about some of our season predictions. We're gonna talk about who do we think is gonna be the leaders, who do we think is gonna be tanking for whatever reason, and then we're gonna be once again, I guess see how wrong we can be.
I can't wait. Let's do this.
Oh yeah. I'm your boy Martin Irving. This is my boy Drake White.
Peace out.
Thanks for riding out on Riding the Pine.